All right. Well, welcome everybody to this SOAR growth series. This is really we do events every couple of months with SOAR Marketing Society and try to bring interesting speakers and topics that help marketers elevate their credibility and their confidence. And so I'm excited about this particular topic, which is all about how to build better trust with your B2B buyers and really influence them. And I've been having a lot of conversations lately with executives and with sales leaders, and I'm hearing this recurring theme that they really want marketing to help them sell into more sophisticated audiences and to reach that executive level buyer. And that's really a tall order for marketers, especially if they're not necessarily the experts in the product or don't, are not a consultant or kind of have that level of expertise. They then kind of are put in a position really as a project manager to go source and find that subject matter expertise. And so I think one of the best ways to do that is thought leadership. And I've personally built some amazing growth with my business through thought leadership. And so I'm very excited to welcome Chris Fox, who has an extremely interesting background, and he's going to do a more formalized intro in a minute, but works with fintech companies currently on developing thought leadership. But because of his background and because of his current work in his consulting practice, he is really in a position to help all of us kind of elevate what we're doing in the practice there. And one thing that I was always fascinated with when talking to Chris is that those books behind him are real.
That is
not a Zoom background. Right, and they are color coded and they are very dense. I mean, you can tell that those are some very dense books back there. So he's an avid reader and learner himself. So I'm excited to welcome him. So thanks, Chris, for joining us.
Thanks, Stacey. I'm glad to be here, and thanks everyone for joining the session. I'm really happy to share my perspectives and experience on thought leadership, and very much would like this to be conversational. So I have a presentation that I'll start with up front. Please feel free to interrupt me at any point. I love to have dialogue, and otherwise be very happy to answer questions about specific challenges or issues or just general questions that you have about the topic of thought leadership. So with that, I'm going to share that short deck that I was mentioning. And we'll skip the title because Stacey has communicated well what we're doing here. Just a little bit more of an intro, as Stacey was saying. So my name is Chris Fox. You can see my photo corresponds pretty well. You're going to see me make that exact same face at some point during the discussion. I'm the managing partner and founder of an agency called Synchrosys. We've been in business since 2007, and since 2015. We've been exclusively focused in the area of thought leadership for financial innovators. And typically that can mean fintechs, but it can also mean, some of the biggest and most institutional financial organizations in the world are also looking to innovate and to emulate what fintech is doing. So we work really across that spectrum, from banks that have been in business for literally hundreds of years to brand new startups that are trying to find an area for disruption. And as I said, the focus is really on thought leadership and on content marketing. We'll get into all the details of what that means. So before we get into the obvious start, which would be, well, what is thought leadership? I'd like to plant an idea in everyone's head, which is that every product, every B2B product, it's also an idea about industry change. And let me say a little bit more about what I mean there. So there's no reason to adopt a B2B product unless there's a reason to do something differently. And the only reason to do something differently is that the creators of that product have an idea that some aspect, it can be a very small slice of the world, or it can be a very large slice like collaboration, but something needs to be different. Some element of your industry needs to work better, or there's something that people have not been able to do that they should be able to do for reason X, for reason Y. And the reason why I am focusing so much on this concept before we even get into thought leadership is that's really the bridge between product marketing, which most B2B marketers are very familiar, very conversant in, and taking that step into thought leadership, because it's at that transition point of, well, if this product represents an idea for people working differently, doing something new, doing something they couldn't do before, then how do we articulate what that idea really is? Why would you change? What pain points does it address? What new opportunities does it create, et cetera? And that's really it's almost as if you're turning the product inside out to reveal its inner dynamics and its inner motivations, and therefore the dynamics and the motivations of executives that are leading that product managers, et cetera. That's really why I dwell so much on this concept of every product is also an idea about industry change. So the other thing, just another one, kind of a starter point to keep in mind, is that I think this is pretty much common knowledge as far as what's on the left here. We are all publishers now. Every organization is constantly publishing stuff, whether it's on social media channels, whether it's on things like Discord servers, or whether it's more traditional formats like emails and blog posts and white papers. B2B companies are always publishers in some way or another. Not all of them are particularly adept at being publishers, but there is always a sense in which that expectation of being a publisher is there. And there's some pretty powerful stats. I know Stacy shared some of them in the description of this event, but there's a few more that I think are really worth dwelling on. These are great, for those of you on this session who are marketers and you're looking to make that case back to the business to say, well, why should we try thought leadership? Why should we keep doing it? Well, here's the data. First of all, more than half of business decision makers will purchase, a major B2B platform product solution from an organization that they hadn't considered before on the basis of their thought leadership. And similarly, just under half of those buyers will say that thought leadership would allow them to purchase from a challenger or a disruptor, a company that they might not have heard before or that was not in their initial consideration set. So, really thought leadership has this, I hate to use military metaphors, I'm not coming up with a better one. It has this kind of armor piercing value of getting into the mind of the buyer and helping them reshape their understanding of the problems they have. And I think that's why we get into this next stat of that 42% will even pay higher prices for services and products because of perceived thought leadership. It's because, this is my hypothesis, it's because thought leadership establishes that sense that your potential vendor understands your problems, understands your needs, can reshape your understanding of what needs to happen, what you need to do, and deliver something that's high trust and high value. So those are all the good things. There's a catch, which is both a bad thing and an opportunity for strong thought leaders, which is if you ask decision makers whether the thought leadership that they're consuming is any good, 71% of them say that less than half of it gives them any particular insights. And I'm sure you're all very well experienced with this. When you download something that's a piece of gated content that's supposed to be this great report that's just what you need to answer a question, and you open it up, you're, wow, thanks, really helpful. So there's a sense in which there's a big opportunity to do well and to do better. So that's kind of the preliminary stuff. And as I promised, I will get around to it. So what is thought leadership? Well, thought leadership is a lot of things. It's, and we'll talk about all these different dimensions, but I think it's important to look at it in this multifaceted approach. I think the most obvious thing is that thought leadership is a kind of content, right? It's not a brochure. It articulates a point of view. It delves into a certain amount of research. Sometimes it actually has primary research behind it. It talks about it can talk about things like technology specs or product specs, but more from an outside in perspective. It's also a strategy. It's a way of how, of all the different levers that we can move in our marketing efforts. One of them would be a strategy. We, as a company, choose to position ourselves as a thought leader on topic X or topic Y, and that's a strategic thing. But it's also a brand principle, right? Because not every company is going to become a thought leader. I mean, tell me whether AT&T, T-Mobile, or Verizon are the thought leader in business telecoms. I don't know. I'm not even sure that's a relevant question because it's such a commoditized service. And it's just not part of their brand. Their brand sits on other principles versus a brand where, let's say you are a B2B services firm, or let's say that you're offering a platform that helps companies with complex accounting problems or whatever it might be. It's that brand principle to say, we're more than a utility. We're something else. We truly add value and reshape what you're doing. You can also think of it as an influencer topic, right? So, you get those pieces of thought leadership out into the world. People read them, people share them. It continues to grow and morph and build influence around you. All of these things are true. I'm not saying like we're going to end up picking one. It's that thought leadership does have all these many facets. It's also commitment, right? Especially for whether it's for an individual or an organization. If I'm an individual and I say that I want to be a thought leader, I can't just publish one or two things and move on and say, all right, I'm done, thought leader. Same thing for organizations. Like as a company, especially, you have to be able to make that commitment. You're committing marketing dollars, marketing time to the creation and dissemination of thought leadership. The business is committing time in supporting or creating some of that thought leadership. It's a real commitment. It's something that has to happen over time because there's a cumulative effect. There's no such thing as an instant thought leader. I mentioned the idea that thought leadership is a case for change. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I started with saying the case for change for the product, making sure that you articulate your product as a case for industry change, but it's also a case for change in how we do marketing. It's the idea of saying, you as a prospect, if I manage to get your attention, I'm going to give you not only a pitch, but I'm going to give you value. And that is a case for change in how this starts to get kind of philosophical, but how we as marketers decide we want to use people's attention. Thought leadership does push change along those lines. And the other thing, let's be honest about it. I probably shouldn't have ended on the bad one, but it's also a buzzword, right? If you spend any time on LinkedIn or marketing blogs or anywhere, thought leadership, it's just the mentions of it and the number of people who are in thought leadership job roles and all of it, it just continues to grow and continues to grow. And you ask all sorts of people, what does this term mean? A lot of them will give you different definitions. And I think that's normal and natural, just given where we are in the level of buzz and hype around thought leadership. And a lot of people will just turn up their nose and say, that's just the letest buzzword and trend, and I don't want to hear about it. It's just like talking about making things go viral 5 years ago, and let's just move on and do our work. And it's an unfortunately true thing about that. This term thought leadership has collected a lot of buzz and a lot of things. You don't even necessarily need to call what you're doing thought leadership, and you can still do and achieve all of the other things in this multifaceted view that I'm talking about. So that's the definitional, all the different aspects of thought leadership. And now let's get a little bit more practical here around, well, how would you do it? Well, there's 5 elements, and they're fairly simple. They're fairly straightforward. We'll get into the details of them in a minute, but it's almost like a journalistic thing of, well, why would you do it? With the 5 W's. Why are you doing it? What do you have to say? Who your thought leaders are? when is it appropriate to put out that thought leadership versus other things that you might be doing, like traditional product marketing or direct demand generation, and where do you do it? So with all these high level philosophical concepts, you can actually be pretty pragmatic around how you get there. And we'll talk about a little bit more about what all of those means. So first of all, thought leadership requires having a strong, solid base, right? You can't just sort of randomly go out and say, well, this one piece of content will be a piece of thought leadership. There's no piece of thought leadership without a whole. It's like having a piece of a puzzle. You wouldn't just have that by itself. And that needs to be grounded in your strategy and your brand. So where does your product choose to position itself in the market? Who are you trying to reach? What are those brand attributes that you're going to market with? Those are the foundation for any kind of thought leadership. And then you start building up from there. So I went on a little bit about this in terms of every product as an idea for change, but that's really the why. For often for founder-led companies, I tell them, look, you've spent all of this time and all this energy and really put your whole personal and professional life at risk in doing this very innovative thing. You're so focused on building it. Take a step back. Remember, why are you doing it? What was your underlying motivation? What did you see out there that would make your industry and your customers' lives better? And let's tap back into that motivation as we think about position now, looking at you as not only a founder, but a thought leader. And I think the same thing is true for more established organizations. Leaders within organizations invest a lot of time and they put a lot of their career and reputation on the line in leading whatever it is they're leading. So maybe it's a larger organization that has multiple product groups and heads of different business lines, smaller organization where it's more just a one C-level team. But they've really got their necks out there as far as having a motivation that they commit to, or they better. I mean, this is obviously not true. Some people are just kind of in it for the check, but those are not really the people we're talking about here.
So I want to pause real quick on that, Chris, because
Sure.
I think it's a great point, and I know I see some people that maybe come from commoditized markets and I've always subscribed to the theory of the rising tide raises all boats. So, thinking of telecom as an example, and potentially you could talk about, when 5G came out, right? And that talking about 5G and positioning yourself as helping to educate the people on why they would want or need that, not necessarily where they're going to get it from, but that concept of introducing something new into an industry that maybe has always done something a certain way. I think thought leadership is a great way to bring that to the forefront and to really, be first in somebody's mind when they think about some of these bigger concepts.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. It's not only, it doesn't always have to be some radical new innovation. And I know I was a little bit snarky about Verizon and AT&T as telecom, but they certainly have the opportunity to be very thoughtful. Certainly they have all the experience behind them about what's next. And I'm sure certain of their business lines do that. And I think, Stacey, you make a really good point, is that, by being in a position, even as a kind of commoditized, very incumbent player, you can still focus on what's next and actually leverage your commodity status to say, look, we see so much of this universe that we are in a great position to tell you what's coming next, which, by the way, happens to align to some new products and services we have coming, but that's the other piece of it. And I think that actually does tie really well to, figuring out, well, where are those specific niches and areas of focus where you can educate and lead through ideas? And that can be either the commoditized what's next, or the more like, we're this new fintech and we're changing the way companies are going to be able to manage their general ledger or something like that. So that's the what, but in all of these, it's really about getting down to like, well, what's the next level of specificity? What's the next level of specificity? The who, it's really like, think of yourself as the casting director. If you're responsible for planning a thought leadership strategy, who's the right person to do it? Sometimes it's the CEO. Sometimes the CEO is a little bit more of a behind the scenes person who, makes the company run really, really well. But there might be someone else who's more of a stage presence, and you put them in front of some of these thought leadership campaigns. And sometimes it's a cast of characters. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The larger your organization is, the more the who will involve a team, and then the challenges, of course, are coordinating that team. And then I think the when and the what, the when and the where are the areas that connect most immediately to tactics and skills that marketers traditionally come to the table with, right? A detailed plan for project planning, figuring out your marketing channels for distribution of thought leadership. That's really, if you flip this pyramid around, those are the strong suits that marketers tend to come to the table with. And then they work harder to get some of these other more strategic elements in place. And that's really all about having a strong dialogue with the business. As a marketer or as a marketing team, you can't just sort of sit inside your own four walls, hatch one of these plans all on your own and expect it to happen. It really comes through a lot of dialogue, a lot of structured and unstructured conversation, informal interactions with leadership in your business to get into these why and what areas, and have that trusted relationship, so that when you get down the line, there isn't a sense of, well, how do we close the gap between marketing and all these complex ideas? Oh, wrong way. So in terms of the why and the what, there are a couple of ways of looking at it. And maybe some of you are familiar with this idea of red ocean versus blue ocean. It was a strategy book from, I guess at this point, about 15 years ago, but I still think it's a great concept of, the red ocean is the feeding frenzy, where there's lots of blood in the water because everyone's chasing the same things. It's incredibly crowded. And it's hard to do work in that red ocean. And the same thing is true. The initial concept is for product strategy and business strategy, but the same thing is true for thought leadership. And I'm sure, many of you have tried to do these kinds of things. You're really competing for existing share of mind and trying to beat the competition, exploit existing attention. If you're in a kind of straddle marketing and comms role, chasing earned media opportunities, you get reporters to cover you. Trying to get everything aligned to what's happening now, and just lots of just like outbound push, like us to them. The blue ocean approach is a lot different, because that's really where you have this is the topic that what you're asserting is that this is the topic that we and only we can be talking about in a credible way, and the competition's irrelevant. Any attention that we're getting around this particular topic is new attention. You're not just chasing PR, but you have a full cycle of content where you're putting out content in many, many formats. I call it the content swarm. There's kind of the one hive, your anchor principles and point, and all the different bees of white papers and blogs and social posts and webinars and earned media coverage are all coming together, bringing, complete the metaphor, bringing honey back to that hive. And it's really, again, that idea of like, we're focusing on the story that only we can tell as a business, or if you're an individual thought leader, the story that only I can tell. And it's hard work. It requires a certain, that's where I was talking about the level of commitment that it takes. There's a really high level of, I would say, kind of psychological preparation for being a thought leadership. And a lot of organizations or thought leaders miss out on that because they just want those benefits that we talked about at the beginning. They don't necessarily think about, well, how hard is it to do all of that inner work? I mean, not like I'm saying we're therapists here, but there is a lot of internal reflection that organizations and individuals need to do in order to get to that level of thought leadership that's just so compelling that it does the kinds of things that we're talking about doing. So that's on the what and the why side. I see that there are 9, so now we're transitioning to who. There are really 9 thought leadership personas. And I'm sure other people would come up with other ways of looking at it. But there's a level of personality to it, or an approach to your topic. You can be advocating for something, you can be criticizing things that are not being done well in other areas. You can be very empathetic in terms of, we understand the industry and customer problems, we empathize with them, and we're really thinking them through. You can be an explorer thought leadership, kind of out there on the bleeding edge on particular topics. A networker, where thought leadership isn't always I publish this thing. Thought leadership can also be, I bring together a bunch of experts across the industry and I let them talk with each other and establish that. Stacy acted as a networker thought leader in this particular session, for example, bringing people together to connect and have an exchange of ideas. There'd be a renegade, people that are just out there saying things that are a little bit wild, but compelling and interesting enough to build them as thought leadership. You'd be a researcher. Some thought leaders do it with a lot of data. They'll commission a study. They figure out a lot of the detail, and that's the vehicle for the thought leadership. Some are much more of a stage performer. You can put them as a keynote speaker for a major industry conference, and everyone will clap at the end. They'll be happy. Or a philosopher. It's probably more mine, is the philosopher of just really thinking about pushing down higher level into more and more of these why. Well, why is that important? Why is that important? But the persona matters because you really think about that in creating a thought leadership strategy. Well, first of all, within our organization, who would we cast in these different roles? Maybe we want to deploy a renegade and an advocate and a researcher. We're going to pick those 3, and who are the best faces in our organization for those roles. And sometimes the persona is, well, for this particular, we're going to do a blog series, and this blog series is all going to be all about taking this empath persona and being an empath for our clients' challenge, or our prospects' challenges. Here's the where. The idea, my slide's a little unreadable there. Sorry, I don't know what happened here. But basically the idea is that there's kind of a ramp. You can start off with mass media, where you're basically buying attention. You're just buying a bunch of ads and hoping people look at them and click through. Or you can seek attention on social media challenges and hope that it happens a little bit more organically. But especially in B2B, it's really delivering the thought leadership through micro channels and creating the attention that you want. I'll often tell clients that I work with that at the end of the day, no matter how big you are, there's really only 500 people that need to see this thing. Now let's figure out how to get it to them, rather than just throwing it up in the air and hoping some small subset of them end up looking up at the time that you threw it in the air. So that's in terms of the channel strategies. And I also want to take a step back, just to think, when you really think about how you make thought leadership work in your organization, this is really where I'm going to close the loop here. It does require content, but I hope I've made this point several times along the way. It's a mindset, and it's a culture change. All of these things need to happen in order for thought leadership to work well at an organizational level. Sometimes it's hard to motivate and mobilize thought leaders within your organization. Sometimes they'll come to you, say, we really want to be doing these things. And sometimes you have to get them excited about the fact that this is a better way for you to build relationships and for this business to get results, is through thought leadership. And you have to kind of push it through. And a lot of times too, it requires coordination across stakeholders. There are marketing elements to it. There are business expertise elements to it. There are stakeholders who produce this material as well, whether it's writers, videographers, designers. It's a lot of coordination, but that's one of the things that marketers do best, right? Figuring out a plan and then basically, getting all those resources together to do the work. Of course, it's always about clear messaging to target audiences, and that clarity around messages is really important. Having the resources available, strong process and project planning, highly specific expertise. And the one thing that I come back to again and again when talking about organizational thought leadership is shared priorities are essential. I've seen this happen time and again where companies want to do thought leadership and there's a lack of shared priorities either among the leadership team or between leadership and marketing or between leadership and kind of like people that are directly responsible for operational activities and more. There can be all these different failed dialogues because there are not shared priorities, and that's really the point that I want to finish on, is that thought leadership, yes, it's a kind of content, and it's a content that you recognize when it's about ideas. It's about the industry, not about your product. But there's all that inner stuff that has to happen around shared priorities and aligning your organization. And what's great about that is that actually, for marketers, doing thought leadership only strengthens your relationship with your business stakeholders, because you're now talking with them on their territory. Sometimes it requires a little bit of a kind of having a translator to talk between the two because you speak different languages. But those shared priorities are critical to the success of thought leadership, but they're also a great way to just kind of take full circle to where we started this, to level up what we do as B2B marketers in the connections and kinds of conversations that we have with the business. And once you get there, what do you have? You have companies or founders, they shine, as the ideas industry is very, very crowded, and getting your business and thought leaders to shine in that crowded industry is it's a big win from a marketing perspective. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love for you to maybe elaborate on that point about finding, how do you know that you have, I guess, a differentiated idea and building that out, kind of taking it to the next level?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, finding the differentiated idea, one of the starting points is, fairly simple, just strategic research, combing through your set of direct competitors and seeing, what are they talking about? What are their positions on these issues? What are their answers to some of the general questions that you would expect everyone in the industry to have? And kind of, reverse triangulating, figuring out, well, if we keep drawing this shape, what's outside that space that we could potentially own as white space? So it's competitors, but it can also be indirect competitors. In other words, not a company that your company competes with for customers, but you're kind of in the same attention space. Looking at, maybe you offer technology, but there's also an analyst that covers that area a lot. You look at what that analyst is talking about and what's the analyst missing. That's another area. So, looking at and also looking at the media conversation. If you're working with your executive team and you come to them and say, look, here's the media conversation around these three topics. Like, what do you think is wrong with it? I mean, I've had that literal conversation with my clients, and it gets them really excited, because as soon as you ask, like, no, that's completely off base, and here's why, and here's why, and here's why, and they get really, really excited to sort of deconstruct the conventional wisdom in the trade media. And then you're like, okay, now I have it. Now we know what that root set of ideas is going to be that we'll use to anchor our thought leadership. Now let's plan out a content strategy that puts those ideas out there.
That's awesome. I mean, I'd love to hear, I guess, from anybody on the call of whether or not you guys have tried thought leadership, or what questions you have about this strategy?
Yeah, I actually had 3 questions, but Stacy, you just asked one of them, so that was perfect. Um, One question I had was just, and this may be related to the size of the clients, honestly, and the marketing budget that they have. But how do you overcome kind of that time pushback? And that's what we deal with is, thought leadership, honestly, from a content perspective, it's been one of the best resulting tools, if you will, that we've used for companies. But we deal with a lot of smaller companies who just want those leads quickly, right? And we say, well, you need this nice mix, and the thought leadership, it's a long-term kind of scaling idea. And they say, yeah, that's great. Okay, we need leads yesterday. And there's really this kind of focus on yeah, what have you done for me now versus what are you going to do for me? So how do you kind of overcome that if you deal with that at all?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tough conversation to have. I'll tell a sort of a sad story about a client that recently left my firm. The reason why they had to disengage is they ran out of money, and the reason why they ran out of money is because they got so focused on chasing lead generation and looking, doing these demand gen activities, but they couldn't get the tactics right. And so that idea of, well, we need leads, it certainly makes a lot of sense. And of course, you want to be able to feed the lower part of the funnel, but there's no lower end of the funnel without the upper end of the funnel. And doing things like publishing a whole bunch of keyword salad, eventually you're going to come to the table and say, well, we've run out of money for our marketing budget, and we kind of are in trouble as a business because we don't have any leads anymore. And now what do we do? So maybe the way to have that discussion is a little bit of the scare story of like, well, here's what goes wrong if you chase leads without brand awareness, is that there's nothing for them to connect to. Your results are going to be much, much lower than they are if you have a pre-qualified set of leads that you've shaped and delivered there. You've basically reoriented your prospects' understanding of the market and their business needs to the point where you become the only solution. And it's not something, you don't have to spend 5 years doing it. You don't need that long of a runway. This is something that you can get going within the space of 3 months. And that's the power of that micro targeting that I was talking about earlier, is if you know who those people are, if you're already in a position of saying, well, we're a small business and we need to generate leads, pick your 50 customers that you want, and with thought leadership, probably get you 10 of them.
And I love what you said, I think at the beginning, which is reframing it, that your marketing really is kind of two-pronged. On one track, you're selling an idea, and you're selling a solution to the status quo. Why change? Why should somebody change? Versus you're selling a product. And so everybody, companies understand, okay, we just want to push our product. We just want to sell our product, but nobody's going to buy your product unless they're bought into the idea of why change first. And that's basically what thought leadership helps you do.
Absolutely.
Christian had a question here. How do you deal with subject matter experts or salespeople who do not understand the power and need for content marketing?
I mean, I guess the sort of snarky answer would be talk them through this deck.
Yeah.
But really, the idea, I want to be a little more serious about it. There's a lot of good data out there. I cherry picked some stats that I really like. Stacy, I think these are the same thing. This from the same study that you found. It was research that was done between the PR firm Edelman and LinkedIn. They repeat that study on a regular basis. And I'd say the serious answer is go through some of these pieces of research that some large organizations have done to talk about the power of thought leadership, and make that case, talk about the benefits, and also come to your stakeholders with some kind of plan. For say, look, we can do a pilot thought leadership program for 15K and here's how. And by the way, here are the results. Like here's the promise of the results that we think we can get in terms of using this industry data. And I find that juxtaposing those two things is like, here's a meaningful pilot. I'm not saying let's commit 5 years worth of marketing budget to do this. I'm just saying, let's do a pilot, see how sticky we can make it. And if it works, keep iterating.
And I would say too, I feel like maybe, especially with the subject matter experts or C-suite, who you really want to be the thought leader, there's probably a little bit of ego play that you can stroke there as well, which is, you know, you're so smart, we want to share these ideas with the world and we want to help you do it, and people are going to follow us because we're changing and, you know, reshaping our industry. And so there's a little bit of I think ego in play that you can
there's
leverage.
A little bit of that, and kind of like reading them and saying, well, you know what, I think this person would get really, really excited and engaged if we gave them the tools to go out there and be the performer, or whichever other one of these it is. And I think that's just taking what you said one step further, for like taking what you know about them and saying, you know, you're so in depth on these topics, you really understand all the nuances. That's pushing their researcher button. It's almost like personality types, right? Like thinking about their personality type and what buttons you can push to get them engaged.
Yeah, exactly. What other questions do people have in terms of getting started? I would love, I mean, if nobody else has a question, I have another one about what's like a really good example that you kind of go back to if people are kind of on the fence with, I don't really understand thought leadership. What is it? Maybe our company does it, maybe they don't. Like, how do you present an example that maybe helps somebody see what the difference between a product brochure and a piece of thought leadership is?
Yeah, so I mean, those are definitely filtered a little bit by industry, although I think you can do it more generally as well. Because I work in finance and fintech, one example that I always come back to is Deutsche Bank, and they have an online/offline magazine called Flow, and they almost never talk about their products. It's just financial industry journalism. It's massively award-winning, gets lots of attention in the industry. So that's one example. Another company that does a great job of it, that's maybe more general in scope, is Microsoft. So there's this whole area of Microsoft. If you look for Microsoft Stories, it's a digital magazine, and it's all this very aspirational stuff about all the creative problem solving that people are able to do with Microsoft products, kind of just like in the background, really in the background. Autodesk, so they're a company that develops computer-aided design software and 3D modeling and all these kinds of things. They have a fantastic digital presence that's pure thought leadership. It's really all about like what's on the cutting edge in the world of design and data visualization and industrial design in general, I should say. And it's sure, eventually, if you're an industrial designer, you're likely to use one of their products or consider one of their products, but it's just all about building that excitement around, here's all these amazing things you can do with 3D design and rendering. So
yeah, that's great. Okay, perfect.
From a channel perspective, could you give some examples of the micro channels that you talked about? Are you thinking like LinkedIn groups, or niche based kind of websites and getting in that community, or
it can really be all of the above. The LinkedIn groups are challenging because a lot of them have just become like spam threads of people. Like, everyone joins the group, no one pays attention to it, people just dump their stuff into it. So those are not necessarily the most promising. A little bit more promising, if you have a paid budget, is to do some custom lists in LinkedIn and throw out a few LinkedIn ads. Sometimes it is as straightforward as emails. if you have a prospect list and it's just a bunch of prospect conversations that have just gone stale, figuring out how to reactivate them with a real conversation starter. Sometimes it's putting the material into the hands of sales and saying, look, you guys, now you have a new topic to bring up with these prospects that maybe have gone cold. And you can rewarm that lead who, knows you and you had an okay conversation, but it didn't go anywhere. Webinars, there are lots of those different kinds of micro channels, but it can really get down to that one-to-one level as well. If I've advised clients saying, well, you need to get the attention of these 12 CEOs. Let's just go do that.
I hope it's okay if I ask one more real quick.
Yeah.
Last one, I swear. Just wondering about, so we try to balance and integrate the execs and the partners with obviously what the company is putting out there. Mm-hmm. How do you recommend, okay, these are the thought leaders, et cetera, that content is pouring over into the company side of things? Any recommendations there?
Yeah, I think it's good to, at minimum, it's essential to look at the strategies side by side and to make sure there's no contradiction. So that's piece number one. Piece number two is, if you sit down and you look at those kind of, what's the overall corporate messaging strategy versus the strategy of this thought leadership campaign, it's almost like a tree structure where, yes, the messaging and the thought leadership needs to align to and maybe even bring out some of the core corporate messaging on the trunk of the tree, but it's kind of branching out and taking more ramifications of those ideas. So that's, that's ultimately what I would say. First of all, no contradictions. Second of all, put them side by side and figure out how it can be almost like a virtuous cycle of messaging that supports messaging that supports messaging.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions for Chris? Okay. Well, this was awesome. I thought it was super helpful, Chris. And, like I said, I've personally developed thought leadership, have recommended it to my clients and built it within companies too. So it is no small task, but the effort always seems to pay off in terms of the results. And I think your suggestion to start small and to do a pilot project and a very micro targeted campaign allows people to see, wow, this actually really did work, and it broke through doors that have been previously closed.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly right. Yeah, well, thanks, Stacy, and thanks everyone for joining. I will say I'm very much an open book, so I'm in the SOAR community. I'm on LinkedIn. If you're thinking about thought leadership and have questions, just connect with me, message me. This is not about me giving you a sales pitch. It's just me being open and liking to talk about these things. So feel free to follow up or at least connect on LinkedIn. And I just want to thank everyone for your time.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. And have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.